3 names. 3 men. 3 phone calls before the sun came up. I remember sitting in that chair, the leather cracked, the armrest stained with things I don't want to name, and I remember the feeling in my chest when I made those calls. Not guilt, not fear, nothing. Just the quiet efficiency of a man doing his job. Like ordering supplies. Like scheduling a meeting. 3 names. 3 calls. Done. I was 29 years old, and I had already forgotten how to feel. The diesel smell of that compound hung in the air like a permanent fog. Somewhere outside, I could hear boots on gravel, my men, running drills in the pre-dawn dark. I'd trained every one of them. Hand-picked. Hardened. I'd taken scared boys and turned them into something the enemy feared. That was my gift. That was my pride. I was a builder of warriors. And I believed, with everything in me, that this was strength. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what I was. I was a commander, a senior operative in a network that stretched across 3 countries. I had blood on my hands that no amount of river water could wash off. I had a reputation that made men go quiet when I walked into a room. In the circles I moved in, reputation was currency. And I was rich. I'd grown up being told that strength was silence. That a real man doesn't weep, doesn't doubt, doesn't break. My father beat that into me, literally, starting when I was 7 years old. Weakness is a disease. He used to say, his belt in his hand, his jaw set like concrete. And I will not raise a sick son. So I learned. I swallowed every tear, buried every fear. And by the time I was a teenager, I had built a wall around my chest so thick, so high, that I genuinely believed nothing could breach it. I was wrong. Brother, listen to me. I'm not telling you this story to impress you. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, there's a man watching this who is sitting in that same leather chair. Maybe not literally, but spiritually, making his calls, running his drills, building his walls. And he thinks what I thought. That he's strong. That he's in control. That he doesn't need saving. I thought that too. Every single morning for 15 years. Until the morning, everything changed. I made my 3 calls. The sun was just starting to push through the cracked window of my room. And there was a Bible. I don't even know how it got there. Contraband. Dangerous. I should have burned it the second I found it tucked inside a supply crate 3 weeks before. Instead, I'd hidden it. Under the floorboard. Under my bunk. That morning, something pulled me to it. I told myself I was just curious. That I was studying the enemy's psychology. That a good commander knows what his opposition believes. I lied to myself. I pulled it out. Open at random. And my eyes fell on words I wasn't ready for. The Lord is a warrior. I stared at that line for a long time. I thought I knew what strength was. I was about to learn I knew absolutely nothing. His name was Commander Tarek. And if you've never been in the presence of a man who has genuinely stopped caring whether you live or die, I mean truly stopped caring, where it shows in his eyes like a light that got switched off years ago, then you cannot understand what it felt like to stand in front of him. Tarek wasn't loud. That was the thing about him that nobody ever warned you about. The men who scream, who slam fists on tables, who get red in the face, those men you can read. You can prepare. But Tarek? He spoke the way a surgeon cuts. Quiet, precise, deliberate. And every word was designed to open something in you that couldn't be closed again. He was 53 years old, built like a man 20 years younger. A scar ran from his left ear to his jaw. A blade, years ago, from a story he never told twice the same way. He'd served in 2 wars before I was born. He'd built our network from 6 men in a basement to an operation that moved across borders like smoke. And he had personally, with his own hands, executed 4 men I knew by name for lesser offenses than what I was now guilty of. I knew all of this when I walked into his office that Tuesday morning. He was standing at the window, back to me. The early light hit the side of his face like a blade itself. He didn't turn around when I entered. He just said, quietly, almost gently, "Close the door." I closed it. "Sit." I sat. The metal chair was cold through my fatigues. My hands rested on my knees. Still, steady. I'd been trained for interrogation. I knew how to control my breathing, my pulse, my expression. I was, in every technical sense, prepared for this conversation. But my chest, underneath all that training, underneath all those walls, my chest was doing something I hadn't felt in years. It was afraid. He turned around slowly. In his left hand, he was holding something small. He set it on the desk between us without a word. It took me 1 second to recognize it. The Bible. The one I'd hidden under my floorboard. He sat down across from me, folded his hands, and for a long moment, he just looked at me the way a man looks at something he's deeply, personally disappointed in. Not angry, disappointed, which was somehow so much worse. "How long?" he said. I said nothing. "How long have you been keeping this?" 3 weeks, I said. No point in lying. He already knew. He nodded slowly, like a doctor receiving test results he'd already expected. "You understand," he said, "what this means." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." He stood up, walked around the desk, and he did something I will never forget. He picked up the Bible, held it in both hands for a moment, almost like he was weighing it. Then he set it back down and looked at me with those dead, switched-off eyes. "Your father," he said, "was one of the finest men I ever knew. He bled for this cause. He raised you to bleed for it too. And this," he tapped the cover with one finger, "this is how you honor him." That hit me somewhere the training couldn't protect, because he knew exactly where to aim. He'd known my father, had stood at his grave, had put his hand on my shoulder that day, and told me I had big boots to fill. "I'm not," I started. "Don't." His voice dropped another degree. "Don't tell me what you are and aren't. I have eyes. I have men. I know you've been slipping away on Thursday nights. I know you've been asking questions. Dangerous questions." He leaned forward, both fists on the desk. "I know you've been talking to the Yusuf brothers." My jaw tightened. The Yusuf brothers, 2 young men in a village 3 kilometers east who had, quietly, carefully, become followers of Jesus. I'd met them through a supply run 6 weeks ago. We'd only spoken twice. I hadn't told anyone. Someone had. "They're being dealt with," Tarek said simply, matter of fact, like he was telling me about a logistics problem. My stomach dropped. "Tarek." "Commander. Commander." I steadied my voice. "They're civilians." "They're not. They're a cancer," he said. "And you," he straightened up, and for the first time, something moved behind those dead eyes. Not anger. Something colder. "You might be too." The room was silent. Outside, I could still hear boots on gravel. Men I trained. Men who, right now, would follow whatever order came down from this desk. He walked back to his side, sat down, opened a drawer, and placed his sidearm on the desk between us. Not pointed at me, just present. A reminder of available options. "Here is what is going to happen," he said. "You're going to take that book. You're going to burn it. In front of me. Right now. And then you're going to go back to your unit, do your job, and we will never speak of this again." He paused. "Or," he let that word sit in the air like smoke, "or you can walk out of this room a marked man. And you know what that means. There is no third option. There is no negotiation. You have 60 seconds to decide." He didn't look at his watch. He didn't need to. I looked at the Bible on the desk. I looked at the gun beside it. I looked at the man across from me. This man who had known my father, who had shaped my world, who held my life in those folded hands like it was paperwork. And somewhere, deep in my chest, behind the walls, behind the training, behind 15 years of manufactured steel, something whispered. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, immovable certainty, like a compass finding north. "Don't." I didn't burn the Bible. I stood up, pushed my chair back, looked Commander Tarek directly in his dead, switched-off eyes, and I said the words that ended my life as I knew it. "I won't." His expression didn't change, not even a flicker. "Then you're already dead," he said. "You just don't know it yet." I walked out of that office, and by nightfall, I had lost everything. My rank, my quarters, my unit, the brotherhood I had built with my own hands, the men I had trained, bled beside, trusted with my life. Every one of them turned their back, not because they wanted to, because they had to, because in our world, association with a murtad, an apostate, was a death sentence by proximity. I was alone, in a way I had never been alone in my life. And brothers, I want you to hear this, because this is the part nobody tells you. The loneliness of a man stripped of his identity, his rank, his brotherhood, his purpose, that is a specific, surgical kind of pain. It doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves. At night, mostly. When the drills stop and the diesel smell fades and the boots on gravel go quiet, and there's nothing left but silence and a question you can't stop asking yourself. Did I just throw everything away for a book I barely understand and a God I've never seen? That was the moment I realized I was about to lose everything. My rank, my family, my life. But something in me whispered, maybe that's exactly what I needed to lose. They put me in a cell the size of a parking space. Concrete floor, concrete walls, a single rusted drain in the center that smelled like everything that had ever been poured into it. A bucket in the corner, a strip of light under the door that disappeared at 9 o'clock every night and didn't come back until morning. No window, no clock, no way to measure time, except by the meals they slid through the slot twice a day. A tin bowl of something gray, a piece of bread hard enough to knock a man out with. This wasn't a government prison. This was Tarek's prison, which meant no documentation, no lawyer, no phone call, no name on any list anywhere. I simply ceased to exist. The first day I was fine. I was a trained operative. I knew isolation protocols. I knew how to compartmentalize, how to manage my psychology, how to stretch mental discipline across days like a tarpaulin over a foxhole. I did push-ups. I counted bricks. I rehearsed tactical scenarios in my head to keep the machinery running. The second day, I was less fine. The third day, I sat in the corner with my back against the wall and my knees pulled to my chest, like a child. God help me, like a child. And I stared at that rusted drain and I thought about every decision that had led me to this particular square of concrete on this particular day. And I started to pray. I didn't really know how. I hadn't prayed, genuinely prayed, not just the mechanical recitations of my upbringing, in longer than I could remember. But I tried. I pressed my hands together, or I held them open, or I put them flat on the cold floor. I didn't know the right posture. I didn't know the right words. I just started talking. Into the dark. Into the silence. Jesus, I don't know if you're real. I don't know if you can hear me. But if you're there, if what those brothers told me is true, I need you to say something. Anything. Because I am running out of reasons to keep breathing in this place. Silence. Just the hum of a generator somewhere in the walls. The distant sound of boots. The drip of something I couldn't see. Silence. I waited. An hour maybe. Maybe more. Nothing came. No voice. No light. No warmth. No sign. Just the same cold concrete. The same gray dark. The same rusted drain. Brother, and I need you to hear me say this honestly, because I think a lot of men give up right here and nobody talks about it. I was furious. Not sad. Furious. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We're men. We don't collapse into weeping when we're disappointed. We get angry. Anger is the only emotion we were ever given permission to wear in public. And I was wearing it now like armor. I slammed my fist into the concrete wall. Split my knuckles. Didn't care. Slammed it again. The pain was almost a relief. At least it was real. At least it was something I could feel and locate and name. Where are you? I said it out loud this time. Not a prayer. An accusation. I gave up everything. Everything. And you can't even speak? You can't even give me a sign? What kind of God are you? The generator hummed. The drain dripped. Nothing. I slid back down the wall. Sat in the dark. And for the first time since I was a boy standing in front of my father's belt, I felt something I had spent 15 years engineering out of my system. I felt small. Not humble. Not broken in a good way. Just small. Insignificant. Like a man who had bet everything on a hand that turned out to be nothing. I had walked away from my rank, my unit, my identity, my father's legacy for this. For a concrete box and a silent ceiling and a God who apparently had nothing to say to a man like me. The shame was the worst part. And men, you know this shame. It's a specific species of pain that lives in your chest like a stone. It's not the shame of getting caught. It's the shame of having believed, of having let your guard down, of having allowed something, someone, to get past the wall. And now here you are, exposed and alone, and the voice that told you to trust, gone. I thought about my father. I hadn't let myself think about him since the day I walked out of Tarek's office. But in that cell, in that dark, he came back to me whether I invited him or not. I could see his face, not the angry face, the one I mostly remembered, jaw set, eyes hard, belt in hand, but the other face, the one I'd seen maybe 3 times in my life. The face from the morning he drove me to my first military training camp. I was 17. He didn't say much on that drive. He never said much. But when I got out of the truck, he put his hand on my shoulder, just for a second, and there was something in his eyes that I had never been able to fully decode. Was it pride? Was it grief? Was it both? I never asked. Men like us didn't ask those questions. And now I never would, because I was dead to him. He'd made that clear through back channels within 48 hours of my defection. Word travels fast in our world. My father, the man who had raised me, hardened me, sent me into this life, had heard that his son had chosen a foreign god over the cause, and he had said, quietly, to someone who made sure I eventually heard it, I don't have a son. For words. No drama. No weeping. Just a clean cut, the way he'd done everything his whole life. And sitting in that cell, I realized that the thing I had never admitted to anyone, not to my unit, not to myself, was that every weapon I'd ever picked up, every order I'd ever followed, every wall I'd ever built around my chest, all of it, every bit of it, had been an attempt to make that man look at me the way he'd looked at me for that 1 second outside the truck. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a look that lasted 3 seconds. And now he'd taken even that back. I put my face in my hands. I didn't weep. I want to be clear about that. Not yet. I wasn't there yet. Men like me don't arrive at weeping quickly. We take the long road, through fury and pride and denial and exhaustion. And only when all of those roads have dead-ended do we finally arrive at the place where the tears are. I wasn't there yet, but I was close. I lifted my face from my hands, looked up at the ceiling, that gray, featureless slab of nothing. And I said it one more time. Quieter now. Not an accusation. Not a prayer exactly. Just a man at the absolute end of his rope, talking into the dark. If you're real, I need you to show up. Because I've got nothing left. I am nothing left. And I don't know how much longer I can hold this. The generator hummed. I waited. Still nothing. But here's the thing about God. And I didn't know this then. I only know it now, looking back. Sometimes the silence isn't absence. Sometimes the silence is the last thing he does before he walks through the wall. I was a warrior who had lost his battle. A protector who couldn't protect himself. A commander with no unit, no mission, no name. And I had nowhere left to turn. Except up. They moved me on the 8th day. Not to freedom. Just to a different cage. A holding room on the east side of the compound. Slightly larger. With an actual window. Though the glass was painted over with black paint so thick you couldn't tell day from night through it. There was a cot. A real one. With a thin mattress that smelled like mildew and old sweat. After 8 days on concrete, it felt like a 5-star hotel. I didn't know why they moved me. In operations like ours, you learn not to ask why. You observe. You adapt. You file information away and wait for the picture to develop. So I settled into the new room, did my push-ups, counted my bricks, and waited. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that my transfer had nothing to do with Tarek's mercy. It had everything to do with a man named Dawit. Dawit was a guard. Ethiopian. Quiet. Mid-30s, with hands like a blacksmith and eyes that were always slightly too calm for the environment he worked in. He'd been on the compound for 2 years. Nobody paid much attention to him. He did his job, kept his head down, didn't talk much. In a place built on aggression and dominance, a quiet man becomes invisible. And Dawit had weaponized his invisibility in a way that, when I eventually understood it, took my breath away. He was a Christian. Not just a Christian, a warrior for Christ, hiding in plain sight inside one of the most dangerous Islamic militant compounds in the region, slipping Bibles to prisoners, praying over men in their sleep, leaving scripture on scraps of paper folded into the lining of bread portions. He had been doing it for 2 years without detection. 2 years. Brother, think about that kind of courage for a moment. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that stands on a stage or posts on the internet. The kind that shows up every single day in silence, in danger, in a place where being discovered means being buried. That is a specific, ferocious kind of bravery that most men will never be asked to demonstrate. Dawit demonstrated it. Every morning, he laced up his boots and walked through those compound gates. I didn't know any of this yet on the first night in the new room. I just found what he'd left. It was tucked into the seam of the mattress. So small I almost missed it. A folded piece of paper, no bigger than my palm, with writing so tiny it must have taken him an hour to fit it all. I unfolded it carefully, like it might detonate, held it up to the strip of light under the door. It was a passage, handwritten, in Arabic, then in English below it, rough, slightly misspelled, but legible. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you, wherever you go. Joshua 1 verse 9. I read it 3 times. Then I turned it over. On the back, in the same tiny handwriting, were 4 words. I didn't understand it. It made no tactical sense. It violated every emotional protocol I'd built. But there it was. 3 nights later, Dawit came. Not during his regular rounds. After hours. The compound was on skeleton crew. I'd learned the rhythms by then, could tell from the pattern of boots and the timing of the light changes. He slipped into my room at what I guessed was around 2 a.m., closed the door without a sound, and stood there in the dark, looking at me with those 2 calm eyes. I was on my feet before he was fully in the room. Old instincts. Hands ready. He raised both of his slowly. Empty palms. The universal language. Brother, he said, very quietly. I'm not your enemy. Something about the way he said brother. Not as a tactical term. Not the way we used it in the unit as a word of tribal ownership. But like he meant it. Like he actually saw me as kin. I didn't lower my hands immediately. But I didn't move either. You left the paper, I said. I did. That's a death sentence if they find out. He smiled. Slow and unhurried. Like a man who has genuinely made his peace with mortality. Many things here are, he said. I've learned to let God hold the schedule. I stared at him. Why? Why risk it for me? You don't know me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that rearranged furniture inside my chest. I know what you were, he said. I know what you've done. I know the names of some of the men you've ordered taken. And I'm telling you, God sent me to this compound for a lot of reasons. But one of them is you. I'm sure of it. I sat down on the cot. Not because I was convinced. Because my legs needed a moment. That makes no sense, I said. No, he agreed, sitting across from me on the floor, cross-legged, completely relaxed. It rarely does at first. Over the next 11 days, Dawit came 3 more times. He brought scripture, not whole Bibles, too dangerous, but passages, carefully chosen ones. Men's passages, I'd call them now. Passages about warriors and battles and God-breathed courage. He brought me Ephesians 6, the armor of God, every piece of it described in the language of a soldier preparing for combat. He brought me the story of David, not the shepherd boy with the sling, but the full David, the warrior king, the man with blood on his hands who God called a man after my own heart. He brought me Gideon, who God chose specifically because he was the weakest man in the weakest clan, and turned him into a military commander who routed an army of thousands with 300 men and torches. Men, real men, broken men, violent men, men with histories that should have disqualified them. And God kept choosing them anyway. You see the pattern? Dawit asked me one night, his voice barely above a breath. God uses fighters, I said slowly. God redeems fighters, Dawit corrected. And then yes, he uses them. Because they already know how to take ground. They just need a new king to take it for. I turned that over in my mind for a long time. I was a man who had devoted his entire identity to taking ground. I knew the tactics. I knew the cost. I knew the discipline it required. The idea that all of it, could be redirected rather than destroyed. It was the first thing anyone had said to me in years that felt like it was built for me specifically. Not a generic religious sales pitch. Not a feel-good bumper sticker. A tactical reframe. A mission reassignment. Same soldier. New king. And something in the warrior part of me, the part that had never fully died, even in that concrete cell, leaned forward. But I won't lie to you, brothers. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. Because alongside that leaning forward was a wall of resistance that had been under construction for 29 years. And it had my father's voice in the mortar. You are choosing weakness, the voice said. You are choosing a foreign god. A soft god. A god for women and children and men who couldn't hack it in the real world. Your father's name. Your bloodline. Your brotherhood. Everything you are about to throw it on a fire for a story in a book that a quiet man smuggled in a mattress seam. I sat with that voice. Really sat with it. Didn't push it away. Didn't pretend it wasn't there. Because that's the thing about real surrender. It's not the absence of resistance. It's the choice you make in the presence of resistance. On the 11th night, after Dawit left, I knelt on that concrete floor. Knees on stone. Hands flat on the ground. And I said something I had never said to anyone in my adult life. I don't know how to do this. I don't know the right words. But I think you've been following me for a long time. And I think I've been running. I'm tired of running. I'm a fighter. I don't know how to be anything else. But if you can use a fighter, if you can use a man like me, then I'm here. I'm listening. Show me. I stayed on my knees for a long time after that. The generator hummed. The black-painted window held its dark. And then, not that night, but 2 nights later, he showed up. I was standing at a crossroads. One path, keep fighting my way, with my hands and my weapons and my pride and my father's voice in my ear. The other path, surrender to his way. Lay down the weapons I could hold. Pick up the ones I couldn't see. I chose surrender. And brothers, that's when the real battle began. It was the middle of the night when it happened. I know that sounds like the beginning of a story someone made up. I know how it sounds. I've told this to men who crossed their arms and narrowed their eyes, and I watched the skepticism move across their faces like weather. I don't blame them. I was that man. I was the man who crossed his arms. I was the man who needed empirical evidence for everything, who trusted nothing he couldn't hold in his hands or verify with his own eyes. So when I tell you what happened in that room on that night, I am telling you as that man. The skeptic, the operator, the commander with blood on his hands who didn't believe in things he couldn't shoot. I am telling you it happened anyway. I've been asleep, or something close to it. That half-sleep of a soldier in hostile territory where your body rests, but your instincts stay dressed and ready. The compound had gone completely quiet. Even the generator had dropped to a low, barely audible hum, like the building itself was holding its breath. And then the temperature changed. Not cold. I want to be precise about this because the details matter. Not the cold of a draft or a failing heating system. Something different. Something that moved through the room like a presence moves through a room. The way you feel someone behind you before you turn around. Except it wasn't behind me. It was everywhere. Like the air itself had become aware. I opened my eyes. He was standing in the corner. Not sitting. Not hovering. Standing. The way a soldier stands. Weight balanced, completely still, completely present. Like a man who has been in enough dangerous rooms to know that stillness is its own kind of power. He wasn't glowing the way the paintings show. There was just light, but it came from him rather than hitting him. Like he was the source rather than the subject. And his face. Brothers, I have to be honest with you. I cannot fully describe his face. Not because I don't remember it. Because language wasn't built for it. The closest I can come is this. He looked like a man who has seen everything. Every war. Every atrocity. Every dark thing human hands have ever done. And he was not broken by it. He was forged by it. His eyes. I keep coming back to his eyes. They were like fire that had learned patience. Like a warrior who has already won the war and is now simply walking through the aftermath with full authority. He looked like the most dangerous man I had ever been in a room with. And simultaneously, and this is the part that undoes me even now, years later, sitting here talking to you, simultaneously he looked like the safest place I had ever been in my life. I didn't move. Couldn't. Not from paralysis. I want to be clear, it wasn't fear that froze me, at least not the kind of fear I knew. It was something closer to what happens when you've been walking in darkness for so long that when someone finally turns on a light, you just stop and stand there and let it land on you. He looked at me for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped, slowly, deliberately, to my hands. I looked down too. My hands were resting on my knees. Calloused. Scarred. The split knuckles from the concrete wall, still healing at the edges. I knew what he was seeing. Not just the physical damage. The other damage. The kind that doesn't show on skin. The men I'd ordered. The calls I'd made before sunrise. The 3 names on 3 mornings that I delivered as casually as a grocery list. He saw all of it. Every bit of it. I could feel the seeing, like standing in a searchlight with nowhere to hide, and realizing, slowly, that the searchlight isn't there to expose you for punishment. It's there because someone was looking for you. He spoke. And brothers, his voice. I don't have adequate words. It wasn't loud, but it had the quality of something that could be loud if it chose to, and was choosing otherwise out of consideration for me. The way a general speaks to a wounded soldier. Not diminished. Modulated. Controlled power, aimed with precision. I know what you've done, he said, not as accusation, as fact, as acknowledgement, as the opening of a conversation between 2 men who are done pretending. I opened my mouth. To say what? I don't know. To justify, to confess, to argue. Some combination of all 3. The way men talk when they're caught and they know it, and they haven't quite decided yet whether to fight or surrender. He spoke again before I could. I know every name, every order, every morning. The generator hummed. And I'm still here. Those 4 words. And I'm still here. I don't know exactly when it happened. At what precise second the wall gave way. I just know that it did. Not with drama. Not with a crack and a crash. It gave way the way a dam gives way. First a trickle, somewhere deep in the structure where the pressure has been building for years. And then suddenly, irresistibly, completely. My face crumpled. I, who had not wept since I was 7 years old. I, who had trained the emotion out of myself with the same discipline I'd used to train everything else. I, who had watched men break under interrogation and felt nothing but clinical assessment of their technique. I, who had buried my father's rejection without a single tear because warriors don't weep. I wept. Not quietly. That's the thing nobody tells you about warrior tears. When they finally come, after decades of compression, they don't trickle. They erupt. Guttural. Physical. The kind of weeping that comes from somewhere below the chest. Somewhere ancient. Somewhere that hasn't seen air in 30 years. I was on my knees before I knew I was moving. Hands on the floor. Head down. And the sound that was coming out of me was not a sound I recognized as my own voice. It was something rawer than that. Something that predated language. The sound of a man being broken open after a lifetime of being sealed shut. I couldn't stop it. Didn't try. And then, I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. Weight. Warmth. Presence. Not metaphorical. Physical. A hand on my shoulder the way a brother puts his hand on your shoulder when you're at the graveside, and there are no words, and he just wants you to know he's there. Solid. Real. A point of contact between my falling apart and something that was not falling apart at all. I looked up. He had knelt beside me. The king of everything. Kneeling on a concrete floor in a militant compound, beside a man with blood on his hands and a broken father and 30 years of compressed grief erupting out of him like a wound finally lanced. He knelt beside me. You were made for battle, he said, and his voice was close now, the modulation gone, just the full warmth of it, aimed directly at the place in me that had been cold the longest. I know that about you. I made that about you. The strength, the discipline, the ability to take ground and hold it when other men fold. He paused. Let that land. But you've been fighting the wrong war, for the wrong king, and it has cost you everything that mattered and given you nothing that lasts. I was still weeping. Couldn't speak. Didn't try. I know your father, he said. And at those words, a sound came out of me that I will not try to describe because I don't have the vocabulary for it. I know what he gave you and what he withheld. I know the weight you've been carrying since you were 7 years old, trying to earn something from a man who didn't know how to give it. I know. His hand tightened on my shoulder. Just slightly. I'm not withholding it. Brothers, I have faced armed men. I have been in rooms where the air itself was threatening. I have operated in combat zones where death was an hourly possibility, and I never, not once, felt my composure leave me completely. This broke me completely. The 7-year-old boy who stood in front of his father's belt and decided that tears were weakness, he surfaced. After 22 years underwater, he surfaced. And he wept. And I let him. For the first time in my life, I let him. I don't know how long we were there. Time had stopped functioning normally. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been an hour. At some point, the weeping slowed. The way a storm slows. Not because the sky has forgotten how to make rain, but because it has finally, fully spent itself. I was still on my knees, still breathing hard. That ragged, post-storm breathing of a man who has just been emptied and doesn't quite know what shape he is now. His hand was still on my shoulder. Get up, he said. Not harsh, just certain. The way you tell a soldier to get up, not to dismiss the fall, but because the fall is over and there's ground to take. I got up. I stood, unsteady, hollowed out, lighter than I'd felt in 30 years. And I don't mean that poetically. I mean it physically, like something I'd been carrying in my chest, something with actual weight and mass and density, had been removed while I wasn't paying attention. He looked at me. Those fire and patience eyes. You are a warrior, he said. You always were. I built that into you before you were born. But I didn't build it for Tarek. I didn't build it for your father's approval. I didn't build it for a cause that trades in bodies and calls it glory. He took one step back, looked at me the way a commander looks at a soldier he's about to commission. I built it for me, and for the men I'm going to send you to. Men who were exactly where you were, sealed shut, fighting the wrong war, carrying weight that's killing them. You know that man better than anyone. Because you were him. A pause. The weight of it settling. Come fight for me, and I'll show you what true strength is. I had fought men twice my size. I had faced the barrel of a gun with steady hands. I had endured isolation and beatings and the surgical cruelty of Commander Tarek without making a sound. I stood in front of Jesus and said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, yes, one word, the most important word I have ever spoken in my life. And in that moment, in that concrete room in that militant compound, on my knees on a cold floor with dried tears on my face and split knuckles on my hands and nothing at all to recommend me, I became a new man. Not perfect, not finished, not without scars or history or the long road of healing still ahead, but new, and his. I'd fought men. I'd faced death. I'd operated in the darkest corners of a dark world. But I had never, not once, not ever, felt power like this. It wasn't violence. It wasn't force. It wasn't the cold efficiency of a weapon or the brutal pride of a reputation. It was love, and it broke me, completely. And brothers, being broken by love is the only kind of breaking that makes you more than you were before. 3 days after Jesus visited my cell, Commander Tarek came back. I heard him before I saw him. I knew his footsteps. Every man in our network did. There was a particular rhythm to the way he walked, a measured, unhurried cadence that said, I own every floor I step on. Heavy boot. Slight pause. Heavy boot. Like a metronome, counting down to something inevitable. I'd heard that rhythm outside interrogation rooms. I'd heard it outside cells where men were about to have very bad days. Now I heard it outside mine. The door opened without a knock. He stepped in. 2 guards behind him, flanking the frame. Big men, men I recognized, men I had once commanded. They didn't meet my eyes. I noted that. Filed it away. Tarek looked different than the last time I'd seen him. Or maybe I looked at him differently. Because something had changed in the way I processed the world. Like a filter had been removed or replaced, and the light coming through was now a different quality. He looked smaller. Not physically. He was still the same imposing, scar-jawed, switched-off-eyed man who had put his sidearm on the desk between us. But there was something missing from the effect he had on me. The gravitational pull. The involuntary straightening of the spine. The recalibration of my survival instincts around the fact of his authority. It was gone. I was standing when he entered. Back straight. Hands on my sides. And I realized, with a clarity that surprised me, that I was not afraid. Not performing fearlessness. I know the difference. I performed it plenty of times. This was the real thing. The kind that doesn't need to be manufactured because it comes from somewhere that fear cannot reach. He looked at me for a long moment, reading me the way he always did. He was good at it. One of his genuine gifts, the ability to assess a man's internal state from his posture and his breathing and the set of his jaw. I watched him read me, and I watched something move behind his eyes. Not much, a flicker, when he couldn't find what he was looking for. He'd come expecting to find a broken man. He found something else. You look different, he said. I'm different, I said. He almost smiled. Almost. Sit down. I'll stand. A beat of silence. The 2 guards shifted almost imperceptibly. Tarek studied me for another 3 seconds. Then he moved to the corner of the room, not the cot side, the wall side, where the light hit differently, and leaned against the concrete with his arms crossed. Taking his time, letting the silence do its preliminary work. I've been patient with you, he said finally. You know that. Another man, any other man in your position, would have been in the ground already. I gave you time because of your father, because of what you contributed to this network, because I believed, and I still believe, that what happened to you is a temporary contamination, a weakness that got through a gap in your defenses. He paused. I'm giving you one final opportunity to close that gap. I looked at him steadily. This man who had shaped a decade of my life. This man who had handed me my first command, who had sat across tables from me in 3 countries, who had once, in a rare, unguarded moment after a successful operation, told me I was the best soldier he'd ever trained. This man whose approval I had worn like a second skin for years without even realizing how much I'd needed it. I felt something for him in that moment that I hadn't expected. Not hatred, not fear, not even contempt. Pity, because I could see it now. what I couldn't see before. The emptiness behind the authority. The thing that wasn't there in those switched-off eyes. He was a man who had traded his soul for a reputation, his humanity for command, his heart for an ideology, and made such a thorough job of the trade that he could no longer remember what he'd given up. He wasn't the villain of my story. He was the warning. He was what I would have become. "Commander," I said. My voice was steady, quieter than I expected. "I respect what you built. I respect what you gave me. But I can't give you what you're asking for. Because what happened to me in this room, it wasn't a contamination. It wasn't a weakness. It was the first true thing I've encountered in 30 years of living. And I won't renounce it." Something shifted in his face. Very subtle. The last degree of temperature, leaving something that was already cold. "Then you've made your choice," he said. "I made it before you walked in," I said. He pushed off the wall, straightened, reached into his jacket with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who wants you to watch every step of what he's doing. He drew his sidearm, checked the magazine, the same gesture he'd made in his office weeks ago, the same surgical theater of it. He chambered around, held the weapon at his side. "Last chance," he said. "Renounce this Jesus. Publicly. In front of these men." He indicated the guards at the door without looking at them. "Get down on your knees, renounce him, and walk out of here with your life. Or you shoot me," I said. "I know. Yes." I looked at him, at the gun, at the two guards in the doorway, their faces carefully neutral, professionally blank, but I could see it, the slight tension in the jaw, the almost invisible thing happening in the eyes of men who are about to watch something they will not be able to forget. I thought of the encounter 3 nights ago, the hand on my shoulder, the voice that said I know every name, I know every morning, and I'm still here. The commission. Come fight for me. I thought of a man on a cross who had every right to call down fire, and chose instead to say, "Father, forgive them." I thought about what real strength looked like when it had nothing left to prove. And I said it, out loud, in front of all of them. "I'm a soldier of Jesus Christ. He is my king. He is my commander, and I will not deny him." The room was absolutely silent. "Shoot me if you need to," I said, "but I won't deny my king." Tarek raised the weapon, aimed it directly at my forehead, and pulled the trigger. Click. The sound of a misfire is distinct, not the crack of discharge, just that small, mechanical, anticlimactic click of a firing pin hitting a primer that doesn't respond. It's a sound that should be followed immediately by a tap-rack bang, the trained muscle memory of any competent operator. Clear the malfunction, reacquire the target, fire. Tarek knew this. He had taught me this. He tapped, racked, aimed, pulled, click, again, click, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 5 misfires. I watched his face change with each one, the clinical detachment cracking, degree by degree, like ice under pressure. By the 3rd misfire, his jaw had tightened. By the 4th, his breathing had changed. I could hear it, the control effort in it, the way a man sounds when something is happening that his framework cannot accommodate. By the 5th, he lowered the weapon slowly and stared at it the way a man stares at something that has just betrayed a fundamental law of reality. He looked up at me, and for the first time in all the years I had known Commander Tarek, this man of iron, this architect of fear, this soldier who had forgotten how to feel, I saw something move across his face that was unmistakably, undeniably human. It was terror, not the tactical assessment of threat, not the managed adrenaline of combat. The deep, cellular terror of a man who has just been confronted with the existence of something that doesn't fit inside his universe. "What?" he said. His voice was different. The surgical precision gone. Just a man's voice, stripped of its construction. "What are you?" I looked at him steadily, and I said the only honest answer I had. "I'm just a man, but my God is real, and he just proved it." The 2 guards at the door, I will never forget this. The 2 guards looked at each other. One of them took a small, involuntary step backward. Not retreat, just the physical response of a body processing something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Tarek stared at me for a long moment. Then he holstered his weapon, slowly, without a word, turned, walked out. His footsteps down the corridor, that measured, metronomic cadence, were different now. Something in the rhythm had changed. Some certainty had gone out of them. The guards closed the door. I stood in the silence of that room, alone again, heart slamming against my ribs, because I want to be honest with you, brothers, my heart was going. The supernatural peace doesn't mean the body doesn't respond. I was breathing hard. My hands, when I looked at them, had a slight tremor that I hadn't felt since my first combat operation as a teenager. But underneath the adrenaline, underneath the physiological storm of what had just happened, there was that bedrock stillness. That immovable, impossible, sourceless peace that had taken up residence in my chest 3 nights ago and refused to be evicted. I sat down on the edge of the cot, put my face in my hands, and I laughed. Not the laugh of a man mocking something, not the brittle laugh of someone in shock. The laugh of a man who has just watched the God of the universe personally intervene in a 9x12 concrete room in a militant compound, and is discovering that the appropriate response to that is somewhere between weeping and laughing, and he's doing both simultaneously. I lost everything that week. Let me be precise about what that means, because men watching this need to hear the full cost, and not just the miracle. Within 72 hours of that confrontation, I lost my rank, permanently stripped, my name removed from every document in the network, as though I had never existed. I lost my quarters, my equipment, every material possession I'd accumulated over 15 years of service. I lost my unit, 30 men I had trained and led and bled beside, who were now under orders to treat me as an enemy combatant on sight. I lost my father's name. That one came through Dawit, who had pieced together intelligence through his invisible network of quiet faithfulness. My father had been contacted, had been told what his son had done. Not just the Christian conversion, but the public declaration, the confrontation with Tariq, the 5 misfires that were already becoming a story people told in whispers across the compound. My father's response had been delivered in the same 4 words as before, only this time with a 5th added. I never had a son. Brothers, I want to stop here, just for a moment. And I want to speak directly to every man watching this who knows what it feels like to hear those words from the mouth of his father, or to feel them even if they were never spoken aloud. I want you to hear me. That pain is real. I'm not going to dress it up or rush past it or tell you it doesn't matter because God is your father now. It matters. It is a specific, irreplaceable wound, and it is allowed to hurt. Grieve it. Let it hurt. Don't be a soldier about it. Or rather, be the right kind of soldier about it, the kind who knows that acknowledging a wound is how you survive it, not how you lose. I grieved it. In that cell. On that cot. I let it be what it was. And then I got up. Because that's also what soldiers do. I chose Jesus. I lost everything. And I gained a kingdom. Dawit got me out on a Thursday night. I don't know how he arranged it. I didn't ask. In operations, you learn quickly that there are moments when the details of an extraction are strictly need to know, and the man being extracted doesn't always need to know. What I know is this. At 1:47 in the morning, the lock on my door opened from the outside, and Dawit was standing there in civilian clothes with a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and those 2 calm eyes that had become, in the weeks of my imprisonment, the most stabilizing thing in my world. He looked at me, said nothing, jerked his head toward the corridor. I got up, followed him. We moved through that compound in the dark like water through cracks. Low, quiet, using every shadow and structural angle with the precision of men who understood tactical movement. My training hadn't left me. It had simply changed employers. I noticed, with a strange clarity, that everything I'd learned in years of operations, the breath control, the footfall discipline, the ability to read a space for threats before committing to movement, all of it was serving me now in an entirely different cause. Same skills. New king. There was a section of perimeter fence on the northeast corner where the surveillance overlap created a 12-second window. Dawit had mapped it over 2 years of patient observation. 12 seconds. We hit that window at a flat run, through a gap he'd pre-cut and pinned back with wire ties that looked from a distance like they were still intact. I went through first, felt the chain link graze my shoulder, hit the ground on the other side in a roll that absorbed the impact the way I'd been taught at 17 years old. Came up running. Dawit was through 10 seconds later. We ran for 400 meters through scrubland. Thorns, loose rock, the smell of dry earth and night air that hit my lungs like the first clean breath after years underwater. My legs were weaker than I expected after weeks of a cell, but adrenaline is an efficient substitute for conditioning in the short term. We ran until we hit a dry riverbed, then followed it north for 20 minutes, then climbed a ridge and dropped into a valley where a battered Land Cruiser was parked with its lights off and its engine already running. Behind the wheel was a man I'd never seen before. 50s. Weathered face. A cross hanging from the rearview mirror that swayed when I pulled the door open and got in. He didn't introduce himself, just pulled away the moment my door closed. I looked at Dawit in the back seat. He was already breathing normally. Those eyes. Where are we going? I asked. Away, he said. That was enough for now. We drove for 11 hours across 3 borders, using routes that I could tell had been used before, not by our network, but by something that moved on different principles. Slower, more careful, built on relationships rather than resources. Safe houses that were actual houses, family homes, small compounds, a church basement once where an elderly man met us at the door at 4 a.m. without surprise, like he'd been expecting us, like this was simply the next item on his schedule, which I later understood it was. This was the underground, the network that operates in the spaces between official structures, built not on ideology or funding or fear, but on the most tactically improbable foundation I had ever encountered in my life. Love. Actual love. The operational kind. Sacrificial. Costly. Unglamorous. Dangerous. Men and women who had decided that the movement of persecuted brothers and sisters across hostile terrain was worth the risk to their own lives and families. I had spent my career in a network that used fear as its primary adhesive. This network used something that, from a purely tactical standpoint, should have been weaker. It wasn't. I watched, across those 11 hours and in the days that followed, as complete strangers put themselves at genuine risk for a man they had never met. For me. With no expectation of reciprocity, no honor code demanding it, no authority enforcing it. Just the simple, staggering conviction that I was their brother, and brothers don't leave brothers behind. I had been in a brotherhood before. I had bled beside men, trained men, trusted men with my life. But I understood, in those 11 hours, the difference between a brotherhood built on shared violence and a brotherhood built on shared love. The first holds as long as the threat holds. The second holds forever. We ended up in a city I won't name. A third-floor apartment above a market that smelled of cardamom and diesel. The diesel following me, I noticed like a faithful dog. 3 rooms. 6 men already living there when I arrived, ranging from 19 to 51. Every one of them with a story. Every one of them a refugee from the same invisible war I'd just escaped. The oldest was a man I'll call Solomon. 51 years old. Former military himself. A different country, a different conflict, but the same essential biography. Hardened. Scarred. A man who carried his history in the set of his jaw and the careful economy of his movements. He'd been a Christian for 9 years. Had led this small underground house church for 6 of them. He shook my hand when I arrived. Held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. Looked at me with eyes that had seen enough of the world to recognize what they were looking at. "Welcome, brother," he said. "You look like a man who just survived something." "I did," I said. "Good." He released my hand. The ones who survive something are the ones who can tell others it's survivable. We need more of those. That was my welcome. No ceremony. No fanfare. No lengthy processing of my history or interrogation of my theology. Just a handshake, a recognition, and an immediate, matter-of-fact assignment of purpose. I fit into that small community the way a dislocated joint fits back into its socket, with some pain, and then with a relief so profound it's almost indistinguishable from healing. But I want to be honest with you, brothers, because this is the part of the testimony that other men need to hear, the part that doesn't always make it into the highlight reel. The escape was not the end of the battle. It was the beginning of a different kind. The external war, Tariq, the compound, the gun against my forehead. That war had a geography. I could see the enemy. I could read the terrain. I could apply everything I knew about tactical survival to navigating it. That war, as dangerous as it was the kind of war I was built for. The internal war was different. In the weeks after my arrival at that apartment, the nights were hard. Not because of external threat. We were as safe as we could be. But because when the adrenaline finally metabolized and the body stopped running on emergency reserves, everything that had been held at bay by the urgency of survival came forward. The faces came. The 3 names I called before sunrise on that morning that felt like a lifetime ago. I knew what had happened to those men. I didn't need confirmation. I knew. And at 2, 3 in the morning, in a sleeping room with 5 other men's breathing around me. Those faces came and stood at the foot of my cot the way Jesus had stood in the corner of my cell. Except these were not healing presences. These were the debts, the weight, the full ledger of a life lived in violence, presented for honest accounting. I want to tell every man watching this who has his own version of that ledger, don't run from it. Don't drink it away. Don't bury it under new activity or new purpose or even new religion. Let Jesus into it, specifically, by name, line by line. Because the miracle of the cross is not that the ledger gets hidden, it's that it gets paid. In full, by someone with the authority and the resources to actually do that. But you have to open the book. You have to let him see every page. I did that, in that apartment, with Solomon sitting across from me at a folding table at 3 in the morning while the city hummed outside, working through it page by page, night by night, with a Bible between us and a man who had done the same work on his own ledger and had come out the other side scarred but whole. Iron sharpens iron. I also want to tell you about betrayal, because it came. 4 months after my escape, someone in our network talked. I don't know who. I've made my peace with not knowing. But Tarek's reach was longer than our precautions, and one morning Solomon came to me with the news that our location had been compromised, and we had 48 hours, maybe less. We moved. Again, the same underground river, different channels. I won't detail the route for reasons that are still relevant. What I will tell you is that during those 48 hours of preparation and movement, something happened that I had not anticipated. I became the one doing the extracting. The youngest man in our group, 19 years old, I'll call him Amos, just converted 3 months prior, still learning the difference between courage and recklessness, froze during our movement. Completely locked up. We were crossing a checkpoint on foot, and something in him just stopped. Eyes wide, breathing wrong, the 1,000-yard stare, a young man whose body had finally processed the full reality of what his faith was costing him. I was behind him. I saw it happen. And, without thinking, purely on instinct, I put my hand on his shoulder, the way a hand had been placed on mine. Felt the trembling in him. Leaned close to his ear. Brother, eyes on me. He turned, looked at me. You are not alone, I said. For words. His breathing changed. The lock released. We moved through that checkpoint without incident. I'm still a fighter, but I want you to hear exactly what I'm fighting for now, because it's nothing like what I was fighting for before, and everything like what I was always supposed to be fighting for. I fight for the 19-year-old who freezes at the checkpoint. I fight for the man at 3 in the morning with his ledger open and nobody to sit across the table from him. I fight for the son whose father said, I don't have a son, and who believes that lie more than he believes any truth. I fight for the commander who has traded his soul for a reputation and doesn't remember what he gave up. I fight for every man sitting in a leather chair making calls before sunrise, convinced that the absence of feeling is the same thing as strength. I lost my rank, my brothers, my father's name, everything the old man I used to be had built his identity on. But I found a new father, a new brotherhood, a new rank, not given by a man with a sidearm and dead eyes, but by the king of everything who knelt on a concrete floor beside me and called me by name, and a mission worth dying for. The only mission that was ever actually worth dying for. I'm recording this from a room that has a window. I know that sounds like a small thing. It isn't. Not to a man who spent weeks staring at black-painted glass and concrete ceilings. Every morning I sit in front of that window. Real glass, real light, the sun coming through at an angle that hits the floor in a rectangle of gold. And I spend a few minutes just being grateful for it. Not in a passive, decorative way. In the active, deliberate, earned way that a man is grateful for something when he knows exactly what its absence costs. That practice, that daily, intentional gratitude, is one of the first things Jesus rebuilt in me. Because men like I used to be, we don't do gratitude. Gratitude requires acknowledgement of dependence, and dependence is weakness, and weakness is the enemy. So we move through our lives taking everything for granted because to appreciate something is to admit you need it, and to admit you need it is to expose a vulnerability, and vulnerability gets you killed. Except it doesn't. That's the lie. That's the foundational, load-bearing lie that the enemy of men's souls has been running for generations. That vulnerability is the same as weakness. That needing is the same as failing. That the man who admits he's broken is less of a man than the one who performs wholeness until he dies behind the performance. I know differently now, and I need to tell you what I know. My life today looks nothing like what I was trained to build. I work with a network, the same underground that extracted me, expanded now, more organized, reaching into places that maps don't fully acknowledge. I help move persecuted believers across hostile terrain. I help men who have come out of militant backgrounds process the transition, the ledger work, the night battles, the identity reconstruction that nobody talks about when they celebrate a conversion, but everybody needs when the celebration is over. I lead a small group of men, 7 right now, different countries, different histories, the same fundamental biography, who meet when we can, in whatever space is available, to do the work that Solomon did with me at that folding table at 3 in the morning. I'm a shepherd now. That word used to make me uncomfortable. It still carries connotations I have to consciously separate from the reality, the soft imagery, the pastoral gentleness, the implication of a man who tends rather than fights. But I've read the actual history of shepherds, brothers. In the ancient world, a shepherd was not a gentle civilian with a decorative staff. He was a guardian. He faced down predators. He operated alone in hostile terrain for weeks at a time. He was responsible for lives that depended entirely on his vigilance and his courage. He carried weapons. He used them. David was a shepherd before he was a king, and he killed a lion with his hands. I am a shepherd now, and I am more of a warrior than I have ever been. I want to speak directly to the men who are watching this, not to the general audience, to the men, because if you've stayed with this story this long, something in you recognizes something in it, and I don't think that's an accident. To the warriors and soldiers watching this, you know how to fight. That's not a liability, it's a gift. But the question you need to ask yourself, brother, is the one I avoided for 15 years. Who are you fighting for? And what are you actually building? Because I built for 15 years. Rank, reputation, fear, a network, a name. And it all came down in 72 hours and left nothing behind that I could hold. You can fight with everything you have for a cause that turns to ash, or you can fight with everything you have for a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Same warrior, different king. And the difference between those two options is the difference between a life that means something and a life that just ends. You were built for battle. I believe that. God made warriors on purpose. He needed them. He still needs them. He will always need them. But he needs warriors who have surrendered their strength to the only commander who has never lost a war. You know how to take orders. You know how to trust your commanding officer with your life. The question is whether you've met the right one yet. I'm telling you, you haven't until you've met him. To the fathers watching this, this one is important. I need you to lean in. Your son is watching you right now, whether you know it or not. He is reading every choice you make, every reaction you have, every time you lead, and every time you abdicate. He is building his definition of manhood from the raw material of your daily life, and he will spend the next 30 years either walking in what you built or recovering from it. I know this because I spent 30 years recovering from mine. My father was not a monster. I need to say that clearly because it's true, and because the easy version of this story makes him one, and easy versions of true stories do everyone a disservice. He was a man who had himself been handed a broken definition of strength, who passed it on with full conviction that he was doing right by me. He didn't know he was wounding me. He thought he was forging me. The distinction matters. But the wound was real regardless of the intention. So fathers, hear me. The most important thing you will ever do for your son is not provide for him, though provision matters. It's not protect him, though protection matters. It's not even discipline him, though discipline absolutely matters. The most important thing you will ever do for your son is show him what a man who knows Jesus looks like from the inside. Not the performance of religion, not the external compliance, the actual internal transformation. The man who can be strong and tender, who can lead and kneel, who can fight and weep, who can provide and receive. The man who has found in Christ the only identity that cannot be taken from him. Be that man for your son. Lead your family to Jesus. Not from behind, from the front. If you've already made mistakes, and every father has, including the ones reading this who know Jesus, it's not too late to turn around. Go to your son, not with explanations and justifications and the defensive architecture men build when they're ashamed. Just go. Look him in the eyes. Say the word that cost the most. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I love you. Those words, from a father's mouth, can do more structural repair in 60 seconds than 30 years of overcompensation. I know because I needed to hear them and never did. And I know what that absence built in me. Don't let your son build what I built. To the sons watching this, your earthly father may have failed you. He may have withheld what you needed most. He may have handed you a definition of manhood that is slowly killing you through violence, or through numbness, or through the relentless, exhausting performance of a strength you don't actually feel. He may have said, with words or with silence, that his approval was conditional and the conditions kept moving. I need you to hear this clearly, brother, and I need you to let it go all the way down. Your heavenly Father has never moved the conditions, because there are none. Not conditional on your performance, not contingent on your reputation, or your rank, or your bloodline, or your history, or the names on the calls you made before sunrise. Not suspended because you failed, not revoked because you ran, not reduced because you wept. He knelt on a concrete floor beside a man with blood on his hands in a militant compound and said, I know everything, and I'm still here. That is not a God who is waiting for you to earn it. That is a God who has already paid it and is simply waiting for you to turn around and receive it. Your earthly father's rejection is real. Grieve it. Let it hurt. And then, when you're ready, and only when you're ready, let the Father who made you take the place of the Father who failed you. Not to replace the man, not to erase the relationship, but to fill the void with something that cannot be taken back. He will not disown you. I know this because he didn't disown me. To every man watching this who thinks he's too far gone, I ordered 3 hits before breakfast on a Tuesday morning and felt nothing. I commanded a network built on blood and fear and called it strength for 15 years. I walked away from men being dealt with the way Tara dealt with things, and I didn't lose sleep over it. And Jesus walked into my cell anyway. Not after I cleaned up. Not after I'd done enough good things to balance the ledger. Not after I'd demonstrated sufficient remorse or completed sufficient penance. He walked in while I was still in the cell, while the blood was still figuratively on my hands, while the ledger was open and full, and the debt was real and unpayable. He walked in anyway. And if he walked in for me, if he knelt on a concrete floor beside me, brother, I promise you, with everything I have and everything I am, he will walk in for you. You're not too far gone. That phrase, too far gone, is not in his vocabulary. I've read the book cover to cover now, multiple times, in multiple languages. That phrase does not appear. What appears instead, over and over and over, in story after story after story, is the image of a father who sees his son while he's still a great way off and runs to him. Runs. Not walks. Not waits. Runs. He is running toward you right now. The only question is whether you'll stop running away. I want to pray with you. Right now. Not a religious recitation, a real conversation between you and a God who is actually listening. If this is your moment, if something in this story cracks something in you, if the wall has a fracture in it today that wasn't there an hour ago, then say this with me. Out loud if you can. In a whisper if that's all you have. In your heart if that's all that's safe. Say it like a soldier talking to his commander. Because that's exactly what it is. Jesus, I've been fighting the wrong battles. For the wrong king. With the wrong weapons. And I am tired. I've done things I can't undo. Carried things I can't put down alone. Built walls that were supposed to protect me and ended up imprisoning me instead. I don't know all the right words. But I know I need you. And I know that you already know everything I'm not saying. So here I am. The real me. Not the performance. Not the rank. Not the reputation. Just me. Forgive me. Come in. Take command. I'm done fighting your authority. I surrender. Make me a warrior for your kingdom. Show me what true strength is. I'm yours. Amen. If you said that, if you meant it, something just happened in the unseen world that is more significant than anything that has ever happened in the seen one. A name was written. A door was opened. A father started running. Welcome to the army, brother. Now the real mission begins. Brothers, I started this story in a leather chair before sunrise, making calls, feeling nothing, convinced that the absence of feeling was the definition of strength. I'm ending it in a room with a window, with a new father, a new name, a new brotherhood, a new mission, with scars that are no longer wounds, they're credentials, evidence that I was in the fight, that it cost something real, that the transformation wasn't theoretical. I'm still a warrior. I'm more of a warrior now than I have ever been. But I fight for the only king who ever fought for me first. And brothers, this is your call to arms. Not to violence. To love. Not to conquest. To service. Not to the accumulation of fear. To the distribution of truth. The only battle that has ever mattered. The only war that ends in a kingdom that cannot fall. Will you answer the call? Because your king is waiting. And he never loses.